the demo is going to cover the Solr and triple store indexing, the fixity service, and we are going to look at the triple store audit service. So what I have here is a couple of terminal sort of windows. And what I'm going to do is first just start the Camel Toolbox. So this is something that you all can do. It's quite straightforward. You just notice that I've essentially CD'd into my FC repo Camel Toolbox. This is my Git repo, and then I'm in Docker Compose. So I just CD in there, and then I'm just going to start it up. Okay, and that's it. It's up. Notice that there are these 4 Docker containers here. So if I flip over here, I can just show you, we have the Fedora instance is running here. And then this is using, by the way, Docker logs, allows you to sort of peek at the logs of your different instances. This is Solr in the lower right or lower left. And then we have the Camel Toolbox is right here. And Fuzeki is here. Now you see some errors here, and this is because the Camel Toolbox comes up before Fedora, and so it's trying to connect to Fedora, but Fedora is not quite up yet. So so here, let me. I'm just going to clear that there. All right. So what I have here is I have Solr up. Here's Fedora, and here is the triple store. And so this is just a select query that's selecting everything in the triple store. So I'm going to demonstrate how things are affected here. So first, notice where the Fedora is empty. I'm going to use the API to create 3 resources here. Okay. And if we go back to Fedora, you can now see that we have a music sort of container, and then 3 binary objects in there: music1, music2, and text1. All right, so now we can go over to the triple store and take a look. And now you can see that essentially all that, the metadata that is found in FCR metadata under each of these resources, namely this metadata, okay, is now in the triple store. And then similarly, if we rerun this Solr query, you can see this is the default LD path transform for Solr. So Solr has in Camel Toolbox, there is a file that you can modify to sort of tweak the way that Solr parses and the RDF. Okay, so our resources are in there. Now we can sort of delete an item. Okay, so let's just delete this text1. Okay, I'm going to delete that. And if we look here in Fedora, you can see that now that text1 resource is gone. And then if we look in Solr, it should also disappear from here. So now we had 4, now we have music1, music2, and no text1. Okay, so that's showing you, and then you can also see similarly on the triple store side. I mean, trust me that it's not there. That there's a lot more data here, but what has happened, if you're curious, is that you can see that there's output from the Camel Toolbox here showing that the Solr responded and is deleting the Solr object here and that down. So you can see that Camel Toolbox is responding, and then here down here, Camel Toolbox here is mediating the interaction with Solar and the triple store. All right, so moving on. Now I'm going to show you how you can turn off, essentially how you could re-index your repository. So suppose you were creating resources and there was no Solar, right? So I'm going to just stop Solar in Docker Compose, and then I'm going to add a new resource, okay? So I'm creating text2 here. So there's a new resource now in Fedora. You can see that here, but you're not going to see that in Solar because Solar isn't running. So I'm going to start Solar, back up, and what's great about Docker Compose is it makes sort of managing a little Fedora ecosystem so easy. You just start Solar, Solar's up, but you can see, okay, there it is, that there's only 3 resources here, and we don't have that text2. So that, then we can bring in the reindexer. So if you take a look at this command line, maybe I'm gonna make this bigger. So here we have the reindexing endpoint. If you wanted to reindex a particular object, you can just add that to the resource name to the end of this path. Otherwise, we're just going to reindex the whole thing because there's only a few items. And then notice here, essentially what the reindexing service does is it just loops through all the resources in your repository, and you can specify the queue that you want it to go to. So there's a queue defined for the for reindexing Solar, for the triple store, and actually for the HTTP forwarding service as well. So right here, we're just going to reindex Solar, since that was the only thing that wasn't running. And we can do that. We can look over here. You can see that it did complete this reindexing. Looks like we have some extra messages in there, that log messages, that's a little too verbose. But notice here now when we reindex, you can see that text2 resources right here now. Okay. Maybe I'll just keep going here, or maybe I'll just quickly pause if there are any questions. Looks like Scott, you raised a hand.
Yeah, I have a question about the endpoints, like the Solar endpoint and the message broker. Are messages queued up so that if the endpoint is unavailable, they just stay in the queue, and then when the endpoint comes back up, they can be sent to the endpoint? I'm thinking in a case where maybe Solar shuts down, a bunch of messages stack up, Solar starts back up again, all those messages are sent, and Solar does the indexing. Is it possible to enable that, or is that enabled?
Yeah, so you're talking about durable messages.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it depends on how you set up your ActiveMQ, but by default, Fedora uses a topic, so the messages are not durable, but you can configure Fedora with Fedora has its own sort of local ActiveMQ, and you can configure that to use a queue as opposed to a topic. So that's one way. Then you can also set things up so that you have essentially a bridge ActiveMQ. So you're having Fedora send its messages not to its own sort of local built-in ActiveMQ, but to some sort of external service, which then you can use as essentially for the splat board for the two applications.
Okay, thank you.
So there are ways ways to do that, yeah, it's essential that any messages are, if you want it to be robust, those messages have to be durable. All right, so let's just look at the fixity. Okay, so I'm just gonna go into, notice here I'm in the Camel Toolbox config, okay, directory. I'm actually gonna enable both fixity and the triple store. Now, just a quick note here, this is the Camel Toolbox configuration. So we now have just a single file for configuring the whole application. And essentially you can turn on the different microservices by specifying the service name and enabled, set it to true. In this case, fixity is enabled, and it's going to have an output. You can specify a success output file for where you want your logs to go. And in this case, it's going into temp fixity success.log. Now, it's just a note here, this file is actually on the instance that Camel Toolbox is running on. So this will be in the Docker container. And then I've also enabled the triple store, or the audit log as well. So we're going to do that quickly if we have time. All right, so moving on. So what I need to do here is I'm going to save. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Let me just make sure that's okay. That looks right. And then I am going to start and stop the Camel Toolbox, or stop and start it, so that these changes are picked up. And if we look over here, we should see Camel Toolbox has come back up. All right, and then we can go to, we can perform our fixity check similarly to how we did the reindexing, but in this case, instead of sending it to the Solr reindexing queue, we send it to the fixity queue. And should just mention that all these settings are documented in the README for Camel Toolbox. So I just run that, and then boom, you can see that there's a bunch of fixity messages here now in Camel Toolbox. And then if we want to log into this instance, we can just, using the Docker exec function, we're now on the Docker instance here. I'll expand this so you can see it. And then what I'm doing is just reading the log here. And so you can see that it's in XML RDF, and which is not super lovely to look at, but it is parsable by the computer. And this might be an area where we might want to innovate or add features, namely to be able to change the types of output you can get. I think maybe a CSV would be also helpful for some people. So this just contains all the fixity information. You can see the checksums are here, and it shows you the resource. The resource name is here, and you can essentially see the size of your resource here. So that's fixity. Clear that. And then we can just look at the audit service. Now, because we already enabled the audit service, we don't need to restart. But what we can do here is we'll create a new service, a new resource. In this case, it's going to be the text audit test. So, have to exit. Okay, so what this is we've just added this text audit test here. And because we had the audit service enabled, the audit service is essentially auditing the lifecycle events of so create, update, and deletes. And it is logging events here. So this is the Fuzeki triple store. And then if I look for the text audit test, you can see this is actually this is the metadata. This is just saying when the repository was created. This is, whenever you create this is the triple store index. But then what we also have here is this is telling you what the event type is, and ing stands for ingest. This is the loc.gov vocabulary. And if you look at, this is the message ID here. So this was the audit message. And then this tells you the time right here. And then tells you the type of event. And these are all, and then you have the related object is right here. So yeah, that covers the, and then of course it also tells you who did it, which is right here, Fedora admin. So maybe I'll just pause here. I think that concludes the demo.